Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're joining from the world. My name's Alex, and welcome to episode 5 of season 1 of AI Sprints. It's been a fast-paced journey through the world of artificial intelligence. We've covered a lot of ground in the last couple of weeks, and I'm just going to highlight and spotlight, I suppose, some of the things that series 1 have really zoned in on. So we kicked off season 1 looking with artificial intelligence through the eyes of the child with Priya Lakhani and Darren Coxon. Then we took a journey into assessment with Daisy Christodoulou and Lord Jim Knight, which was fascinating insight. If you haven't watched that episode, watch it back. In fact, watch them all back via the STEM learning community. Next up, we dived into sort of ethics and policy with Laura Knight and John Chippendale. And then last session, we kind of took a long view of artificial intelligence through the lens of various different guises. And for that, you can catch up on that episode. And today we're going to look at practical pedagogy and use cases within the classroom. So I'm delighted to kind of come to this season finale and focus it back where it really started, which is in the classroom. So all of us that are joining this call have probably got an interest in how we use AI in the classroom in a practical, safe, ethical way with our children. And my guests today are absolute experts in this domain, and I'm really thankful that they're joining us and they're going to be able to showcase what they've been doing, which is really kind of impressive in this sphere of artificial intelligence, but also something that's practical and we can take away and potentially try in our schools with our children and learn from this. So before we get into the guests, just a big shout out to the sponsor. So we've got Brain Freeze back with us today at 4:30 on the dot. Hopefully we stick to script. There's going to be a demonstration from Brain Freeze for 5 minutes that you can kind of watch, learn, and take that technology on board and potentially try that as well with a trial and a demo coming up. And we're going to be sharing screens, we're going to be sharing ideas, we're going to be sharing opinions. We might agree on some stuff, we might disagree on stuff. AI in education, as I said before, it's a technology with a divided soul. So it's very complex, and we're going to dive under the surface of it in today's edition. So I'm super excited for this, and stick around to the end because I've got a massive announcement. Before we introduce the guests, just a massive shout out to Broad Clyst Primary School. It's in Exeter in Devon. I am actually in an amazing studio. I can't believe there's a studio like this in a primary school in the UK. It's a state-funded school. There we go. Look at this. Wrap around green screen, and as you can see, we've got the STEM learning, so it looks like I'm in 2 places at once, the National STEM Centre and a green screen studio, the wonders of technology. So really grateful for the Cornerstones Academy for hosting me down here. I'm really proud to be doing the AI Sprints final one from here. So let's get stuck into it. First of all, our first guest is John Dolman, and he's got 25 years of teaching English all over the world. So he's got a really interesting background. He'll probably talk a bit about the countries he's worked in today, but just to give you a bit of an idea, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and his current role is looking at media studies, and he's a passionate advocate for AI in Northumberland. He has a Master of Education in Educational Leadership, which is a pretty cool Master of Education to have. And he got that from Newcastle University. And he's commonly known out there as the AI English teacher. So if you haven't come across his work, he's very prevalent on social media platforms, particularly LinkedIn, and does some wonderful work around AI, writing, sort of modeling, feedback, scaffolding, and we'll dive into some of that stuff today. He's a literacy expert, and he shares his AI insights through the AI English Teacher platform, which he'll share and will share in the chat feed. So welcome. Lovely to see you, John. Thanks for joining us. Next up, we got...
Thank you for...
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Next up, we got David Curran. So David Curran, his current leadership role is Assistive Technology Lead and Head of Careers. I love Assistive Technology Lead. What a cool title that is. And he works at Moon Hall School, and he's a dyslexia specialist. Plus, he's an independent careers advisor, extensive state education background, 16 years as a D&T teacher, first D&T teacher we've had on the sprints, so wicked to have you here. Head of faculty, he loves STEM, he's an evangelist for STEM, ICT computing lead, and he's a level 6 trained careers leader with 4 years now in AT leadership role. He's done loads of CPD, loads of training, and he's somebody that I'm always referring to when I talk about SEND, adaptive teaching, and dyslexia-based work in the AI space. There's a lot of credibility there, and I know that I'm always passing them on to people. So sorry for that, David, you've had loads of emails, but you are really good, which is why people want to speak to you. So it's fantastic that we've got these 2 teachers who are active, they're in classrooms working with artificial intelligence on the chalk face, and they've got some fascinating insights to share with you guys today. So that's our guest. David, you're welcome to come here. Great to see you. How are you?
Yeah, struggling. All our parents are leaving and nicking our Wi-Fi as they're going past. So yeah, dipping in and out. I do apologise about that. I missed the introduction. I'm going to have to watch the recording now.
Yeah, it'll be good for your ego. So watch it back when you
Yeah.
get a minute. It's just kind of bigging you up. So it's well worth watching. And let's dive in, guys. So the theme today is practical classroom applications. It couldn't be more practical, David, than the teachers and parents leaving the school in the background. That's real. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So we thank the sponsors. Let's get into the meaty part of it. Let's dive in. What's got you both excited in the world of AI this week? And we'll start with John, if that's all right.
I mean, crikey, this has been a big week, but I think the big one this week was just Google's recent announcement, dropping Gemini into classrooms. So you're seeing frontline frontier models sitting inside the platforms that students are using now, and putting that inside the education models gives it all the safeguards that mean that it's usable directly in front of students of all ages.
Yeah, and let's just break that down for the audience, for those that might not be familiar with things like Notebook LM. Obviously, up until a couple of weeks ago, that had an 18 plus advisory user base, and that's now dropped down to 13, hasn't it? Which is significant for educators wanting to use that podcast technology in the classroom. Are there any other Google features that you would put on people's roadmap?
I mean, Notebook LM is probably the one that we've all been waiting to get in front of students. But the fact that Gemini, the actual large language model itself, they've now got an education specific version of that goes through. So if you've got a Google school with Google accounts, the student's account has an access to an age appropriate version of a large language model. You know, certainly I haven't tried it, but that's what the headline figure is there. Gemini for kids, basically designed for use in classrooms, guardrails up. Interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, exciting. Thanks for that insight. And David, what about yourself? You know, you're always sharing stuff on socials. What's got you excited this week?
Well, I suppose Microsoft are countering, aren't they, with their study packs on OneNote and the likes. And then we've got Ofsted with their announcement. But yeah, I was actually come out of this, or going into this meeting. Yeah, I've launched a new MindJoy chatbot for futures, to sort of for our juniors with some games and stuff. And somehow one of our students has used it to create his own game, like a game of chance. So I'm just kind of, I want to get into his conversation and find out how he's done that. But yeah, he's created a careers game on a careers advice chatbot. So yeah, that's my big thing. I know it should be Ofsted and it should be sort of Google and Microsoft, but no, that's my big one.
Yeah. I'm going to go slightly different. I was at a conference up at STEM Learning in York on Friday, and it was just such an enlightening event to speak to so many passionate teachers from all over the country that love AI and have got a passion for it, from people that have never turned a large language model on to some top consultants like Darren Coxon and John Chippendale and Iqbal that were really pushing the sort of boundaries. And that I learned a lot from that day. So if you came along and you were there, it was great to meet you, and I hope you enjoyed it too. So loads are going on in the AI sphere, lots of exciting news, and we're kind of living through history, and it's accelerating. It's quite apt really being the AI sprints, because we're racing towards AGI on one spectrum, with people like OpenAI announcing that's their primary objective, and then other companies like Anthropic's Claude saying, whoa, let's just hold fire, and education's kind of stuck somewhere in between. So John, you've been doing some really exciting work, and I want to kind of give you a bit of time now with the audience to kind of walk us through that, because I think there's some really rich learnings for all teachers, not just STEM teachers. And what I'm kind of fascinated in here is how your students have been engaging with traditional essay writing. So that's like scripted writing stuff using a pen and paper, and how you've been building AI into the feedback loop. And you've been doing some what I think is really pioneering work. When I speak about it with people, people are really impressed with what you're doing. So I wondered if you could just give us some kind of quite a lot of depth around why you did it, what you're up to, what the results have been. Over to you.
Well, perfect. Thank you. And that's a big introduction. It's actually one of the, I think probably one of the most important things to sketch out here is it sounds revolutionary, but it's actually a really small tweak where I'm actually not changing fundamentally. I'm changing fundamentally kind of like how I want the kids to think, but I'm not fundamentally doing masses of different things to my approach. So as you said, it was a regular essay writing. We were just looking at a 15-mark media studies essay where I do, you do. So I modeled, we co-created our first paragraph. Students went on and finished the work in time conditions as per usual. Nothing different from what we normally do there, nothing revolutionary. It was the next phase that I wanted to really get students to think about. So one of the things that we found they're not always as good at, just perhaps because of the fact there's something personal about this, is doing peer feedback. So I got them to generate an essay in ChatGPT. So we got permission from our A-level students, from their parents, to allow them to use ChatGPT because it's got a 16+ threshold. We got them to turn the training data off. So just being really, really clear that we're following those guidelines. So I showed them where to turn the model training data off, walk them through that on the screen. Is it okay if can I quickly share my screen? I can show you some of the examples of what we produced. Yeah. So
Tim might have to give you permission, but it should be fairly easier to do. There we go.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So essentially, this is the model that I was using. I just essentially got the kids to follow that regular process, and got them to think about, okay, what was the difference between their work and the work that the large language model produced? So we were actually seeing some significant differences, and there's an example here. Sorry, my screen's been a bit slow. So I'm showing you the side-by-side comparison that I created. So I don't know whether you can tell, but one of these is a human-produced piece of work, and the other one is produced by a large language model. And when the students did their work, they found very similar patterns. So we got them to use the same prompt. They even gave the large language model an uploaded version of the mark scheme and of the entire specification, because you actually can do that with something like ChatGPT. You can add a file. So I just got them to add the files needed. I didn't really coach them through the prompt. I just said, all I said was get it to create the essay. So they basically gave it the same question. And here you can see there are two models. This one here on the right is actually one that I live wrote as they were writing. So I wrote at the same time they did. So they could see me modeling this. I did it on a PowerPoint so they could see it happening. And this was one that was produced by my own Claude project that I used. And you can see there's a clear difference here. And what we started to see was the students were able to identify the differences between the two pieces. They were able to pick out the fact that the large language model itself produced something that was remarkably formulaic. And what was really interesting was the students were able to go, okay, yeah, we can see what it's done very well, but when we look at our own work, we have greater depth of understanding and application. Whereas the large language model has a really highly structured response. So it was getting them to understand what it did well, i.e. it was able to follow the mark scheme very well, but what they were better at, but integrate their work. And it's that feedback loop where they could identify their own strengths, but then draw on the strengths of the large language model, which in this instance is that kind of structural nature. It's really good at producing something that is highly structured and fits that mark scheme. And of course, what we want is that we obviously want students to get the marks in the exam, but we really want them to understand their own creativity and what their strengths are. And I think that's where that worked really well. And you're engaging metacognition, because to do this, you have to understand your topic and you have to understand what you're being asked to do and how you're being asked to apply it. So it really, really did move things along. If I can just quickly do another quick screen share, because I'll show you where what I then actually did get the students to produce was, I'll just quickly show this on the screen. This is an example of the student work. So here is their work, and then they had that opportunity to sort of engage in that dialogic feedback loop where they looked at what ChatGPT had produced and they altered their own work as a direct result of it. And what was really interesting was I fed my response into an AI, and it was nice for Claude to tell me that my work was better, which was nice. And the kids were getting that same thing. So they were finding out that, you know, they identified that. It's really interesting. The large language model knows that its own response is formulaic, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just want to ask a couple of questions that I've got on my mind, and if anybody in the audience wants to ask something, we've got the chat feed. Please populate it with questions, and we'll try and be quite sort of responsive as we go through, if any of this stuff spikes your interest. So obviously, moving around the country, John, I get asked by teachers all the time. I had this question today too. What about plagiarism, Alex? Like, so, you know, are kids just using AI to do their homework, or are they actually using it as a creative medium to spark ideas? In which case, it's probably okay. In your experience, it kind of sounds like you're using it as kind of a critical friend, but also like a creative medium. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's what I'd want to coach the students into using it as. The problem, I've done a bit of research in my own context and identified sort of how students are using it. And at the minute, obviously, most of the time it's unsupervised, because it's very little of this being done in front of students. And we know that the worst thing we can do for education is remove all of the friction, because that useful friction will just not produce anything. And students who just want to rush to the end point can do that. There's lots of ways you can do that in a way that wouldn't be detectable. So the best thing to do is to show them those really strong use cases. But I'm in conversation with my sixth formers all the time, and they're finding some really clever ways of using ChatGPT primarily, but whatever large language model, as you say, as a critical friend. They often will say that even some of my year 11s were saying that they used it to revise by getting it to ask them questions. So working with it in a kind of Socratic model. And I think when you hear students know, inherently they know what is good and what is good learning. I think that they're instinctive and they're using it instinctively. But when they want to use it to bypass because they just don't see value or they're in a hurry, that's when it can become dangerous.
Yeah, and there's so many layers to this. I mean, I'm thinking just from a teacher point of view, love the idea of getting them to use it as a critical friend. Equally, I was kind of interested in unpicking the metacognition piece a little bit more. So can you just give the audience a little bit more context on that, if that's okay?
So one of the things I wanted them to do was just be aware of how their thinking had worked and expose the model's thinking to show how it was thinking in terms of structure. They were thinking in terms of depth, but then wedding the two things together. So if they can understand the learning process and then reflect back on that to improve their own work, it brings those two things together in particular. And it's thinking about that writing process for an essay-based subject like mine is really, really important. So if they can think about how can I improve, and then now they've got that metacognitive model where they're going, well, I can actually use that feedback loop to improve my own work. And they're thinking, and the next stage was something that I actually am going to encourage the students to do next, which is what I want them to do is prompt the model to create the very best essay they can. And now to do that, you need to understand what the very best essay needs to look like. You have to give it those ingredients. And once you can do that, you can start building that theory of knowledge in your own head. And once you've got that, you're onto a winner. And we know the research indicates that metacognition has a huge impact on student outcomes.
Yeah, fascinating. And just that, how do we use the word prompt quite openly there? And just with the language we're dropping in here, just to explain to people that don't necessarily understand the language, prompt is the thing that you enter into the interface, and the large language model, the LLM. John spoke about Claude, which is Anthropic's model. Do you use the paid version? Do you use 4.0, John, or do you use the basic free access version?
I use a paid version, have done for a long time, because I just think it's well worth it. But again, increasingly the free versions are powerful enough for most use cases. And again, if you're lucky enough to be in a Google school, you now have access to Gemini Pro.
Yeah. And most of your kids using ChatGPT, where are they gravitating towards? I know certainly the kids I work with, they're all using ChatGPT, and when I say Claude, they're like, what? Or Google, oh yeah, but that's their kind of loyalty piece. Well, how are you are you encouraging them to use a model? Are they finding their own way with it?
We're still at that nascent phase. Being a Google school, the chances are we will probably gravitate towards Gemini, simply because of the advanced safety measures that are built into that. ChatGPT is certainly the one. The surveys I've introduced, ChatGPT is the one that they all know. The model Goth, unfortunately, the little app that has been produced by the makers of TikTok has gained an awful lot of traction, unfortunately. And interestingly enough, Snap's AI and Meta's AI sitting inside the messaging services are unfortunately also increasingly. And I find that these are also problematic because they're low value and not necessarily that effective, but they're the ones that students are accessing. I think does kind of lend a bit of weight to the idea that we need to be educating students on what is and isn't effective and what is and isn't good.
Yeah, and I think the models you're alluding to, we're pretty safe to mention them here, John, under the ethical kind of wrap. So I think you're talking about DeepSeek, you're talking about Grok, you're talking about some of these more problematic large language models that are out there and accessible. And can we just, for the audience, David, feel free to chip in here as well, because I know you've got a lot of expertise in this area, but can we just unpack why we should really be cautious and discourage potentially people using both of those two large language models?
To be honest, I think the bigger question is why are students cheating rather than how they're cheating. And if we look at that, anybody who's heard me before is I'm not the greatest fan of the current education system, and I'm quite open about that. But we work within the boundaries that we're given. And if students are given opportunities to cheat, then, since way before generative AI was used, cheating was apparent. Being sold the exam questions down the bike shed. before a test and stuff when I was at school. You know, it's kind of gone on, and maybe we should be having those conversations. I know we've kind of looked at education and whether or not things like homework, you know, do we set homework that can be done on ChatGPT, for example, or do we set, I don't know, collaborative project work where the students can use it to help research, for example, or support their work, but the actual thing that's being assessed is not actually an output from an LLM, for example. So maybe we need to start at the education or the assessment of the assignment.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. Just one more thing, John, before we go over to David and look at his research and his work. So you mentioned kind of on your notes to me that the process that you explained to the audience just a minute ago showed the structural limitations of the large language models. Can you just shed a little bit of a light on what those limitations were, if that's okay?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things. I know the language models are getting better and better and better, but if we just boil it down to its most simple form, the large language models, I don't like this. It's very reductive, but in its simplest form, they're essentially advanced autocomplete. They are guessing what the next word in a string should be. They're guessing it based on a vast quantity of data, a hugely competent algorithm, which does more than just look at where the next word is. There's lots and lots of things we can talk about in terms of temperature, in terms of weightings, and all of the complex maths that goes behind it, of which I have a vague understanding. But essentially, they are looking at a pattern in the language and matching it to patterns in their training data. So when you ask for something which is relatively formulaic, they respond by shooting for that midpoint. They're looking at the average, most likely response. So as a result, it produces a formula. And actually, if you then give them something like a mark scheme, they'll correlate whatever you ask them to that. So you're saying, here's a mark scheme, and you can clearly see it patterns, right? I need to produce, particularly if what I said was, be very clear in when you ask it to produce an essay, say it's in the exam conditions, it's 20 minutes long, it needs to have this many points. And sure enough, it produced something that followed a formula, because the machine is literally following formula. It's a complex formula nonetheless. And that did reveal that underlying structure, which I thought was interesting. And it was just an interesting learning point for the students as well.
Fantastic. And on that point about the students, what would you say is the one big takeaway for teachers from that research that you did that they could take away and potentially roll out and have a go at in their classroom?
One thing I would say is it's where and when you choose to use a tool. So if we look at the recent MIT study that blew up everywhere, and it got eventually the MIT researchers said, firstly, we didn't actually publish this. It's not been peer reviewed. And by the way, it hasn't showed half the things that people have claimed. And it was this study that was saying, and headlines went, ChatGPT makes you stupid, ChatGPT makes you clever. It said both of these things, but it essentially looked at brain activity and engagement when you're using ChatGPT to write an essay. And this was really interesting because I did this before this came to light. And what they discovered was students who wrote by hand and then interacted with an LLM at the end of the writing process had an increased level of engagement. What that translates to, nobody's entirely sure, but that would be my takeaways. Like, think very carefully. If you're going to use something like this, which I think you can, think about doing the work first, getting some of that effort in, and then, because that's when it tends to have the greatest impact. Human creativity first.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. That was really rich. Loads of insights there. If you've got any questions for John, he's going to get a bit of a breather now whilst we segue over to Daniel. So David. I'm sure he won't mind jumping in the chat feed and answering some of those questions if you've got any about the work that you've just heard about. And although that was kind of English specific, if you think of any extended writing, whether it's history, sociology, psychology, any of those essay-based subjects, it's really, really useful. And just as a better background context, AI traditionally has struggled with extended writing because it's quite a task for it, as John alluded to be able to like annotate and read a piece of work and give it a accurate grade when you compare the student grade. And I know at primary level, Daisy Christodoulou with her company No More Marking has done a lot of work with comparative judgment and kind of come to the same conclusions. So David, we're going to bring you in because you're doing something totally different. But I think one of the things I get asked about a lot on the road is like, okay, so we got, student populations are getting more diverse, more eclectic. There's more need than ever before. And post-COVID, we're kind of really picking up that maybe some needs have gone unnoticed, and we're starting to see that play out in our classrooms. So I think your work is so important at the moment in terms of what you do. So I obviously gave you an intro, David, but just tell us a little bit about your day to day. What do you do on a daily basis in schools?
I'm fascinated by these chat conversations that are going on and the questions at the moment, but they're great stuff. I'll get back to those. Yeah, just a quick little background. Hi, I've been in education for over 20 years now. Started off as a design technology teacher. So yeah, me and STEM Learning have been friends for quite a few years now, it seems. From then moved into sort of careers, computer science, and then of course we went into lockdown. With lockdown, we were still expected to do to get students came out of and our teacher association requirements. This role assistant technology. I'm very teachers today for students in 10 to 12 students. This I also study an hour a week. Students have got text to speech, speech to text, so the original AIs that are mapping shapes and sounds. So way back in '56 with the Dartmouth conference. That's kind of the AI that we were using prior to ChatGPT. It meant that because we've got this 1 hour a week, and when AI came in, and also I'm head of careers, I can build lots of things into the curriculum that are non-exam specific. So it meant that kind of when ChatGPT sort of, what's in November 22, we kind of dove straight in and kind of gave it a go.
Use Ofsted terms.
Which meant it was a great opportunity for us. Since then, it's kind of that backpedal. We had an original AI policy that obviously needs updating. John's mentioned quite a few times there, and it is so important. Make sure you've got a safe environment. Make sure the students have kind of got an ethical understanding of like bias and hallucinations, for example. But it's meant that I can go on the journey with our students, and by doing so, I've kind of seen them overcome their issues with dyslexia. And I've got 1,000,001 contexts and stories I've told you guys, and I'll probably allude to a few or I'll tell a few in a bit. But essentially, we've got it on timetable. So as well as learning myself, I've been seeing dyslexic students learn how to use it through my teaching. So it's helped me. So there's a lot of kind of my prompting. We do a lot of work with chatbots now as well, where there's an inbuilt accessibility. And I think it's that word differentiation that we've heard as a teacher for however many years. Kind of, if you're doing it, you don't realize you're doing it. So building that accessibility feature in, making sure that your outputs have got reading ages, for example, or making sure you're breaking it down into short, simple sentences so that students can use AI. And again, we've got written consent, so our year 9s and above use it still. And then we've got chatbots across the whole of the school down into juniors as well. That's probably the long version of kind of the short answer, isn't it? Yep.
Yeah, just on the chatbots, David, just to stop you quickly, because some people won't know what chatbots are. They probably might have heard of them or even interacted with them, but could you just give us an overview of what is a chatbot?
Yeah, so in essence, if you're using your large language model and you're just typing in who won the Civil War, and then instead of sort of Cromwell and Charles I, you get a lot of kind of American stuff. So again, be aware of hallucinations and bias. You can use it to ask questions. If you program your LLM, so for example, you write a series of prompts, within the first prompt, I can hand that to my students. So my LLM now becomes a chatbot. Yeah. So Dan Fitzpatrick, I still use, 3 years later, I still use one of his original hacks, which is a thing called PREP. So prompt, role, explicit instructions, and parameters. So if I'm using ChatGPT, I'll say you are, and I will give it a role. I will also say who I am. So it's got it in context. Make sure my instructions are explicit. It's a very good helper. It's like that little dog or that sort of little puppy by the side of you that runs off and it wants to go and help, but you've got to make sure you sort of keep it on its leash until it's got all the instructions, and then it'll run off and it'll kind of do things and come back and they know, okay, I actually want it in English. I don't want any Americanisms, don't want any AI tells. I want it for a reading age of 14, despite the fact that my students might be in year 11. I've got to make sure I nail down those parameters. I can use that, or I can pass that on to my students for them to use it. So an LLM has now become a little bit of a chatbot. They can have that conversation, but it's set in context. Do you want me to carry on?
Yeah, just a question quickly.
Yeah.
So just for the audience as well, just to kind of clarify a few bits. So you can actually personalize in your, if you use ChatGPT or any large language model, you can customize your kind of theme and identity within that large language model. So for example, you can be Gen Z, you can be witty, you can be straight shooting. There's lots of variations of that, and it's just in the settings on the top right hand corner. So you can actually, what kind of David's alluding to here is there's potential to really customize this large language model and create customized bots. And am I right in thinking, David, you're creating like GPTs for individual students, or am I wrong there? Is that what you're actually doing with this technology?
So with that, I can give those prompts to students, and we've been doing that, like I say, for a couple of years. So they can, year 11s have used it for revision. They tell it which exam board they are. They tell them that you're a year 11 student studying for XYZ. They tell them the topic within that they want to study, and then they tell them that they want to have a conversation with, I don't know, whoever's the next face on social media. So it speaks to them in the voice or the tone of whoever that they're. So it gives that a little bit personalized learning. I think John mentioned before about sort of using it as a revision aid. From there, what we found out was, in exactly the same way, and hands up here, if you give me a tool to play with, I will play with it. So if I'm sitting there trying to use ChatGPT for lesson planning, first of all, I've got my training data turned off for intellectual properties. I've got my memory set. So after a while, it's starting to learn my style, and it knows what I'm after. You know, it knows my sort of, my style and what my output to be. But within 10 minutes, I'm kind of looking at the football, or I'm kind of, oh, that's interesting. And you're down various rabbit holes, and students do exactly the same. So what we found was I'd give them a great prompt. Half the class would use it, and the other half of the class would start to use it. And then they'd be, and genuinely, and we all do it, it's clickbait, isn't it? You end up going down the conversation. We also can't monitor the conversations, and this was something that's come out recently with the DFE regulations and guidelines about safeguarding and monitoring. So it means students can share the conversations. So originally I would get them to look at college courses. They could share that conversation with me. So when I have my one-to-one, I've got that starting point with them. But I can't safeguard against it. So we started to look at how we could customize bots that focus on a single sole domain knowledge and understanding, whether it's DT or whether it's career, so they can't kind of veer off. And then make sure it's customized for them personally, and then also make sure we can safeguard. So we use a platform called MindJoy, which is a licensed platform, and I can go in and I can real time monitor their conversations. I turned the moderation filter right down to strict the other day to see what happened, my emails were pinging off, and all the students were doing, they were doing creative writing, but because their creative writing was sad, it was coming back that, sort of make sure you keep an eye on your well-being and the like.
But that's good though, isn't it? That's a useful feature of the technology. Yeah. Okay.
Brilliant.
Let's pause it there, just because we're going to go to a demo, and we're going to pick this back up after the demo day, because there's some points to explore here, and you're both generous enough to kind of do some more screen sharing. And I believe, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to take us inside one of these bots. Is that right?
Show you the gut.
Yeah, it shows the guts of the bots, which is going to be fascinating. I'm intrigued to see that. But before we get there, we're just going to take a quick break, an opportunity for all of you in the audience to plaster that chat feed with some questions for our guests. You lot are great at sharing what apps you're using, whether it's AI wrapper apps, new toys and platforms. Chuck it all in there, guys. Use it as a springboard to learn from each other. This demo is going to be about 4 to 5 minutes, and John from Brain Freeze, our sponsor for today's episode, if you followed the sprints, you would have seen John and the team before. They're going to come on and show you another great feature for their platform. Once that's done, we're going to rejoin this conversation with our amazing guests, and we're going to dive in a little bit more detail on some of the stuff they've said in the first section. So Tim and John, over to you for the screen share.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
We've got you.
Great. All right. Well, I think it's an amazing conversation, just coming off of what David just mentioned with building, essentially memory objects and monitoring conversations and choosing different LLMs. What we really do is encapsulate all of those next level things. So typically a stage 1 use or stage 2 is somebody that's using basic ChatGPTs and using kind of the basic available functionality. and then you sort of want more. And I think what we've heard today is some really amazing use cases and advanced stuff. And what I'm going to show you today is what I'm going to call the basics. And these sort of look like wraparound type things, but really what we've done at the heart of it is we built an entire platform at the enterprise level that allows you to completely build and orchestrate what we call agents. Now, for teachers, we use the term assistants, but really what we're talking about is workflow. So step one is kind of doing some basic chat and doing, I'll say, discrete tasks, which is a lot of what I'm going to show you today, because that's where the majority of the world is at. Stage two is when you really, or whatever stage you want to call it, but the next step is really when you want to start to incorporate all your own curriculum, your own one-on-one teaching, your own rostering, LMSs, so that you start really building all these things together. So if you want to start the video, I'll just sort of talk through some of these use cases, and then I'll show you how you get to kind of the really advanced protocols as we go later into the demo. But to get started here, if you just, I don't know if I can hit the play button or if you can. There we go. All right. So these are, again, this is probably what you've seen with a lot of the apps that are out there. There's, there's tens or hundreds of these types of things that look like simple chatbots or assistants where you can create lesson plans, etc. What I'm going to tell you is a little bit behind the scenes here. This one is actually based off a curriculum or Common Core standards or a combination. So you can start loading in standards based on a country, based on standards based on maybe you're a school focused on a specific philosophy, and then even the week that you're on, or even down to integrating what the student may be doing at a personal level. So creating these lesson plans is really quite interesting because you can start to make them very, very personalized. Chat assistants, everybody does chat assistants, but really there was some terminology about hallucinations or things making up answers. Everything that we do is really grounded on your own documentation, your own policies. So if you want to create a parent chat bot and you wanted to have it based on your own handbook of what is your own, what is your own cell phone policy, or what is your own policy on attendance or tardiness, etc. We're not going to go out and sort of make up something. Everything that we do is really based on a school or a district's or a council's own documentation and processes. When it comes to something like a teacher meeting prep, this could be based on an ongoing dialogue with that parent, perhaps even bringing in a history of emails that they've had back and forth, different Zoom calls that have been transcribed or something like that, information that is really much more germane or detailed about what's going on. Can auto write the email to the parent. You can create a history of that. So really create a very dramatic personal workflow. And then I heard the concept of monitoring conversations. So this is an example where you can create what we call a space or a place where you could create an assignment, a reading assignment, a math assignment, a one-on-one tutoring assignment, and then you can monitor the conversations one-on-one. You can create all of the guardrails that we've talked about. So a lot of the LLMs, of course, have guardrails. The difference is they all have different guardrails and different types of policies. And so what we do is we help you standardize all those types of things where you can create all your own policies, guardrails, your own kind of customization of the exact platform. And then you can do all kinds of things where, again, virtual tutoring, one-on-one tutoring, tying in advanced equations and math, and you decide how you want the system to help. Do you want it to give you an answer? Do you want to make it Socratic? Do you want to go down the path of kind of helping? Is this really a homework assignment where you want to kind of show it faster, or you want to kind of continue to challenge the child or the student with additional questions, or even maybe do some gamification around that. So all these workflow things you can do. You can even create your own assistant. So this is where somebody was just mentioning the temperature, or sort of the, I think maybe it was David mentioning kind of the personality. So we've taken all that, we try and make it super simple. You create, this agent or this assistant, if you will, you tell it what you want to do. You can even tell it, again, the curriculum, the content that you want to bring in, and then we will go in the background, actually build this workflow behind the scenes so that you don't have to do it. And we'll incorporate all of your standard guardrails and protocols, logging, audit trails, everything as well that goes with it. So in this case, it's creating a personal lesson plan, bringing in a student roster of an individual, linking that to maybe their personal hobbies and interests. And the way that we do all this is we have a really powerful platform on the back end. So we've incorporated hundreds and hundreds of different models. You don't have to pick and choose between what's the latest one. And we can sort of optimize for this in the background with automated routing. You can bring in all your different data sources, not just your traditional LMS or student information system, but your things that might be on Box or Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive or even email or Figma or wherever it might be these days. You create all your own categories and your own levels. And the nice thing is this transcends across the model. So if you have models that have different types of guardrails, you don't have to worry about that because we're kind of doing those things in there. And then we also have all the logging. So maybe you don't get pounded with a bunch of emails. And again, you can go back and adjust those temperatures. So that was a small sliver of what we do. But I think the key point is that as you progress down this life cycle path, these use cases that we're hearing from John and David are fantastic. These are inspiring to me, and I think to everybody, of how you can push the ball forward with AI. At some point, you'll also want to incorporate your own documentation, your own curriculum. Even a teacher might have their own things they want to incorporate. You might want to create the workflow of sending out a homework assignment, having them submit it online, auto-grade it, provide them a rubric, and then really the teachers focused on the creativity, that instruction that really changes the game. And really what we're trying to do is allow the teachers to create that workflow to leverage what they do best, which is create a learning environment, to kind of love to learn, love to teach. And the more that we can do to assist, where the teacher's in control, they are able to have a safe environment and help the students and kind of help their own sanity. That's kind of our goal in the big picture. So you can learn more at brainsfreeze.co. This is free for teachers. So again, what you saw was sort of the wraparound agent, as you call them, that component where you can even build your own assistant, that's all free for teachers. It's less than in US dollars, 50 cents. It's also available. We have over 200 languages and dialects that we support. So that includes Arabic, includes multi-byte character sets, and you can even do this as English as a second language, etc. We can tailor the system to be Queen's English or Australian English, so you won't get a full US version. On the free version, you probably will, but we do tailor that. And then also for regulatory, we have hosting around the world, so we can host this for your school directly in the UK or mainland Europe or Australia, or wherever you might be. So that's a little bit about us. Happy to answer more in the chat or offline too.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John, and thanks for joining us today as our sponsor. And if you haven't checked Brain Freeze out, scan the QR code, give it a look. And these guys were at BET this year. This is where we met. And it's great to see you up at the STEM Learning Conference last Friday as well, exhibiting and chatting with all the delegates. So check Brain Freeze out. They're doing something a little bit different in the space, so well worth a look if they're not on your radar. And thank you so much, John and the team, because I know a lot of work went in the background to bring that in. And John's going to jump in and join the end of this conversation. Where are you today, John? Every time I speak to you, you're somewhere different. Where in the world?
I was in San Antonio the last 2 days at ISTE, which is a really big event here in the States.
Yeah.
So I think and exciting, to hear about the new announcements from Google. What's exciting about all these announcements is they're bringing these models into the open forum so that they can be run in a cost-effective way. When you're talking about doing hundreds or tens of thousands of students, traditionally, even if it was a small token amount or cost per transaction, it becomes untenable. But if you can start running these on a dedicated GPU, if you will, that you're paying for on a monthly basis, and it's, maybe you have a bit of latency, but it's volume independent, that to me is really, really exciting. The other thing that we did going into ISTE was we started creating a bunch of commercials using the new VO, and it's phenomenal. The ability now, what we would have taken weeks to create in terms of a 30-second commercial about the product, that we can do now in 10 minutes. It's quite phenomenal. So there's a lot of exciting announcements. I think in terms of education, the ability to bring the models that are very functional into the classroom and into an environment where it's cost effective, that's game changing. Yeah, fantastic. And thanks for those insights. You're out in the States, you're at the cutting edge. Sometimes I know you're over in Silicon Valley. Have you met Sam Altman yet? Is he someone that you've met yet? No, I haven't met him. I've been at the same events, but look, it's a busy world. Everybody's running hard. So the ground is moving so fast these days.
So you can't get him on next episode of Sprints. That was going to be my next question, but that's fine. We'll move on. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. Before we do, just a few things that are useful for you to know. If you're interested in this, if any of these things have spiked your interest, particularly around the ethics, the plagiarism, I know some people have spoken about that in the chat feed. STEM Learning run a course called Unlocking AI. We've done our third cohort. We just had 23 or 4 people on that. And I recognize a couple of people in the chat from that. Fantastic. Nice to see you. The next cohort 4 goes up in the autumn term, and you can sign up for that. We're going to post the links here. And we've also got 2 big conferences coming for STEM Learning, one in London and one in York in the next year. So that's going to have keynotes, it's going to have exhibitions, it's going to have workshops. So we'll share all of that stuff with you so you can get stuck in. That's not the big announcement. The big announcement is going to come at the end, and I promise that it is coming. But what we're going to do next is we're going to dive in with John and with David in a little bit more depth into some of the research they've done. And John, I want to pick up with this idea with you with text leveling. So when we spoke, you talked about text leveling. So for those that don't know what text leveling is, what is text leveling, and what have you done with it in terms of AI?
So essentially, it's just, I think David alluded to it at the start, which is just making sure that you are producing reading material for students that matches their abilities. Now, obviously, we don't want to take things too far down. We need, Vygotsky's term of proximal development. We need to be stretching students. But if you're presenting like the average GCSE student with something with a reading level of 18, and they're coming in at or a shade below their chronological reading age, instantly you're creating unhelpful cognitive load. You're presenting them with material they just can't access. And if you've ever done a reading age level test on your average textbook, it's got a reading age level which is way above the target audience. It's bizarre. It's educational producers don't seem to consider this. So as classroom teachers, it's something that we have to try and tackle.
Interesting. And in your notes as well, you spoke to me about this idea of voice note transcription. So what is that, and how do you do that with AI?
Well, again, there's the power of AI, because it's focusing on language. It's brilliant at transcribing things. So one of the things that I do is I'll frequently just voice note. I'll record myself on an app, something like Otter AI, something like Firefly,
or like something similar.
Yeah, or even just the voice notes on your phone. Audio pen, free, simple, 3-minute long snap, little bite-sized chunks. And I will record myself. So what I started getting the students to do was, okay, summarize what your learning is. You've got 3 minutes. We use this app called Audio Pen. I can, anything really. I've got students who were even planning their EPQs using their voice notes on their iPhones and using this technique to summarize, create a text, give it to me, show me that you've actually done the work. Some of them hate it, to be fair, some of them hate it. But students who struggle with the blank page and the writing, who are really good at talking their ideas out, they enjoy it. They find it a really good way to access. And it can get over some of that. And again, you've obviously got the idea of access as well for students where physically getting written work down might be problematic.
Interesting, yeah. And some kids and adults just don't like the sound of their own voice, so that could be a barrier potentially. And whether it's AI or not, it's always been a problem. And fantastic, and so interesting, and so relative and to the classroom and the everyday practices that so many of the audience find themselves in. And I know just during the 5-minute demo, the chat feed was blowing up. And thank you so much to both of you for responding so quickly to that. I kind of can't because my laptop's down here, and if I do that, I look really funky on the screen. So I'm leaving you to it. But just some really good questions. Keep them coming. We'll try and get through as many as we can. We won't be able to do them all, but I've been really waiting for this for quite a while now, since David told me he's going to do it. Let's look at the guts, David, of a bot, because I'm fascinated to see if they look like human guts. Not that I've ever seen human guts for real, but I've seen them in movies. So let's do it. So I think you need to screen share for this. I assume you do.
Yeah, can I just go to whole screen? I'm not going to do sound and stuff. Am I sharing now?
Not yet. Oh yes, something's happening.
Right, okay, sorry, a bit of a delay here. So this is inside the MindJoy platform. I'm going to kind of show you MindJoy. There's so much free stuff out there as well. Like I say, if we don't get a chance, please drop me a line. There's so much free stuff from Microsoft using their learning accelerators for example. I'm just going to kind of show you MindJoy in the time that I've got. So yeah, MindJoy, there's a whole bunch of tutors on here, community tutors that are shared. We've got my tutors, these are ones I've created, and then I can share that amongst our staff. We've got a whole school license. So you can see here, we've got history bot, business bot. So we've got subject support bots. I've got a little starter bot. We've got an AI compliance bot, and I'll explain kind of how these work. I'm just going to kind of go through. One of my first ones was this little guy here. There you go. Oh yeah. We've got a teacher creation bot, so based on Rosenshine's principles, which is what we use here at our school. So we can use training data on there, which is one of the questions somebody's mentioned. This is Futures bot. This was the original. This is my little careers bot. It starts off with a little new chat. You've seen this before, any sort of LLM. This is programmed. This is what you see. I can listen to it. I can type in, or I can dictate in. So again, it's got that text to speech, speech to text feature, which is so important with our students. It's strange though.
So David, is this for the is this for the kids or the teachers? Just to clarify, these bots that you've shown us.
So yeah, so both.
Okay.
So we've got student-facing ones, for example, this careers one or the subject one. We've got teacher resource creation one that's based on Rosenshine's principles. Because this is a closed system and no information is being fed out onto the system, we can use it for creating support plans. So our SEN staff can upload teacher feedback, for example, and again, we still code rather than use names. We use codes to protect the innocent. But again, they can ask questions of it. We can put our own training data. We can put our own support plan pro formas on there, and we can get it to sort of help to write. I think John mentioned before about it being a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox. So again, keep that human in the loop, okay? It's never kind of the final thing, but it can help sort of reduce some of the admin time and get teachers or get SEN therapy staff in front of the students where we should be. What you don't generally see on an LLM is the bit that's inside of it. So this is that little prompt. Yeah, so this is the guts. You can see this is one of my first ones, which is kind of basically written how my brain wrote it. But again, you're a chatbot called Futures Bot. You're going to help it. I tell it where it is. There's my little role. So it's a specialist, dyslexic specialist school. My only role is to give students in school in England impartial and expert careers advice in education. They speak to me, so it keeps referring them back to me, again, to keep that human in the loop. The one that I looked at today, which will make a little bit more sense, if I just come out of this one and go into my little Futures Bot Junior, this is one for our year 7s and 8s, more visuals. We've uploaded images so we can kind of click to links again. I can have these conversations. I mentioned before about prep. So prompt, role, explicit instructions, and parameters. I've just put the parameters up here first so we can kind of see these. Scrolling down, this is some information I've fed. Somebody was mentioning in the chat about how do you get rid of some of the bias. This is one way, so I can upload my own data into here. I've given it a role. I've given it a sole domain of knowledge, okay? If students ask questions outside this domain of knowledge, then please kind of remind them. So if they ask for recipes for cookies, for example, it'll lightheartedly just say, have you thought of a career in catering, for example? I've made sure it complies with our safeguarding policies. I've given it some explicit instructions. This one's about playing games and it's got a load of links it can go to. And then this is kind of, these are the big bits. So I've uploaded, and again, you can do this with you can upload this on ChatGPT as well, but careful, be aware of, okay, it's not a closed system, so be aware of what information you're uploading. I can upload information here. So I've uploaded information from the British Dyslexia Association, from about pathological demand avoidance, from the National Autistic Association. I've put our safeguarding policies on there as well. I've put careers documents on there, put training data on there. I put it into Socratic mode so it can save it all for it. I've saved my changes, and then I go in and I have a bit of a play with it. Okay, it takes probably about a couple of hours to play around with this chat. The parameters, John mentioned about sort of reading ages. I've asked this for 6 to 12-year-olds, be sympathetic, and giving it strategies for neurodiverse. So for example, our students are dyslexic, but they don't like being told. So I've asked it, give short, clear sentences with a reading age of 8, adjusting as needed, be empathetic to any spelling or grammar, politely spell the word correctly in response without making any mention of the spelling. One of our year 8 students absolutely loved it. She knew she was spelling it incorrectly, but she likes the fact that it spells it correctly when it comes back, but it doesn't tell her, it doesn't like red pen her paper. So it was great for that. Always using British UK spelling and grammar. Yeah, that's kind of the guts and the inside. But yeah, that's, you can see it's a lot more sort of clearer. There's my parameters, my explicit instructions. I've given it the role as well. I put my training data on here. So I'm trying to sort of reduce the actual bias, and I've given it sole domain of knowledge so the kids can't start looking at mountain biking or football or whatever they wish to look at.
Fascinating.
Should we get back in?
Hang on.
Yeah.
So much there. Like, I'm pretty good with AI, and this is boggling my mind.
You're gonna
about you, John, but there's so much there. So really what we're doing, we're showing the insides of how you kind of almost program and instruct this bot to kind of be more customizable. That's kind of where we're going with this. And for each of those bots, it's like 2 hours of your work. I guess my question is, like, some people might be watching that, David, going, oh my word, that's way beyond my realm of possibility. What advice or what places would you point people to be able to find out more about this practice?
I think one of the great quotes I've heard in the last few weeks, again, was, I'm not bigging him up, but Mr. Dolman there was saying his greatest PD at the moment is LinkedIn. Find people that resonate with you. Find the fun. I think Mary Poppins said about finding the fun in things, and then it's no longer a task. I can't remember the lot. And then something about taking things out of her bag. But yeah, find the fun. So kind of get it to do the things that you might find like the drudgery tasks, or find kind of just, again, find the fun. Get it to do the things that you want it to do. We don't have that much spare time as a teacher, so I do a lot of it in my own time. So I try and make it into a hobby. I'm kind of learning something for myself and enjoying what I'm learning, and then I'm translating it into the classroom. It's very, very difficult when you've got, your stack of marking and you've got your reports to write, to find time within your timetable day in order to be able to do it. What I would say though is, know your users, know your students. You cannot take the human out of the loop. There's no point me giving a reading age of 16 for my year 11 students in DT if I know their average reading age is 14, so I can program that in. So I've got to know my users. Like I say, in a class of full all dyslexic students, they know which one's the most dyslexic. We've all been there, the strongest, the fastest, the richest. Everyone knows about that within students. So students can use this. It's been programmed in a particular way that kind of finds a level, so everyone is able to use this equally. We mentioned about cheating before. Is text-to-speech cheating? Is speech-to-text cheating? Is our grammar checkers, is that cheating? I don't know, to be honest. If students can access information, we should be looking at kind of what tasks we're setting rather than how they're actually accessing or outputting that information.
Okay, David, that was phenomenal. So many insights. I think a lot of people might have to watch this back a couple of times just to dissect the different parts. It's been quite techie today. Appreciate that. If you're coming at it and AI is new, hopefully you're not scared. I did say the two most technical guests till the end, although Darren's very technical too. So yeah, fascinating. And what we're going to do now, John, we're just going to come back to you, some words of wisdom for you as a sort of an innovator in this space. What sort of advice would you give to teachers with AI that might be quite new to it?
Which John are you referring to, me?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, AI English teacher John. I'll come to the other John at the end.
Thank you. I would say, I think David's actually said it, is just play, get involved, and if you do nothing else, and this is what I do with my training with staff, re-level a text, put a text into a large language model and say, can you produce this at a reading level for students like this? Again, obviously being I always make sure I'm using ones where the training data is turned off and I'm using texts that are obviously appropriate and are not breaking IP, but stuff that's in the classroom has that fair use. Please just, can you make this readable for students? And we've just produced level texts for every topic that we teach in media studies, and it took me a couple of hours to do the entire 2-year unit of work. So if you're going to start somewhere, start with that, explore how it can transform text, because that's what it's really strong at. And once you start seeing that potential, I think you'll be really, you'll be hooked, and you'll notice where it can really make a big difference.
Amazing. So some homework basically for teachers to go and have a play around with. And also, John Marshall, from your point of view, as someone who's developing these products, what advice would you give to teachers other than they must try Brain Freeze, obviously?
You know what? I think there's a lot of tools out there. The exciting time is, I think you just have to jump in. What we see oftentimes is that when you go into a school, if you take 10 teachers, 4 have never touched anything, 3 have played around a bit, and 2 or 3 are using already advanced tools. So I think, even opposed to LinkedIn, you can often find experts in your own school that you may not even know about. We often see the scenario where there's a hesitancy to get started. And then once you kind of get past using, I'll say 5 different, whatever you want to call them, assistants, chatbots, whatever, you want to essentially, talk to a historical figure, you want to grade a paper, you want to translate something, level up or level down reading. Once you start doing, I'll say past 5, then, the hamster wheel starts moving and you get more and more excited. And then the creativity really starts to flow of, could AI help me do this? And I think that's really the exciting point that most people will get to this year. We're entering that time where a lot of people are going back to school soon. I love the idea in tech of hackathons, and we've seen a lot of schools where you could even get all the teachers together for a couple hours and do a small hackathon of, hey, how can we help each other? Just learn how to do a few things. It's hard to do it on your own, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. If you put a group of teachers together in a school that some know what they're doing and they want to help each other, you would be surprised how quickly that momentum moves forward.
Amazing. Well, guys, I feel like I've run a marathon, let alone a sprint. It's been so full on. There's so much there to unpack. And thank you so much for all of you for joining us. This is STEM Learning AI Sprints. This is episode 5 of season 1. You can catch up on this episode and the other 4 episodes on the STEM Learning community. You just need to get yourself a free account and then you can watch them back. A lot of people have been using them for CPD in their schools, taking little snippets of these recordings, and they've told us they've got great value from that. So please use them as you wish. And to the announcement time. So here it is. It's official. Season 2 of AI Sprints is going to go live starting in September. We're going to announce the guests. We've got some really exciting ones, some really big names, and some people that might not be on your radar but should be. And they're going to come live, and they're going to be coming fast from September onwards with 1 a month for season 2 of AI Sprints. It's been a huge success, and you, the audience, and the guests have been a big part of that. So thank you so much for joining us on this journey. It's been a bit of an experiment, but it's been a great experiment. And I want to thank all of you for coming on board. Thanks for getting involved in the chat feed. Thanks for reaching out via email, via the socials. We've loved every minute of it, and we can't wait to see you back. Have an amazing summer break. Watch these back if you get a little bit of downtime. Take on board from the experts what they've told you. And safe journey home, everyone. Thank you so much. See you very soon.